The European Union pledges over €88 million this year to support the Palestinian Authority. Israel says it acted independently in striking Gaza. And Egypt's foreign minister and his United Arab Emirates counterpart discussed Gaza and Sudan and agreed to boost coordination.
And then, of course, we have the host tonight, and I just want to thank you very much. It was a reason we chose Egypt, because you were very helpful, and very, very helpful. Everybody wanted to have this, but we really thought it was appropriate, and you are a great leader. And he's a fantastic man and a fantastic general, by the way. But he's a great president, and I want to thank Egypt and all of your representatives for treating us all so well. Thank you very much.
The news in detail. The European Union says it has pledged more than €88 million this year to support the Palestinian Authority, with Brussels stressing that future funding is tied to a reform agenda and a viable two-state solution. European Commissioner for the Mediterranean Dubravka Sousa said EU member states have so far pledged over €88 million in 2025 to assist the Palestinian Authority, adding that the bloc's financial support is linked to reforms the Palestinian Authority has committed to implement. She described those reforms as a prerequisite for a viable two-state solution, which she called the EU's ultimate goal. The 27-nation bloc, the largest financial backer of the Palestinians, is also seeking a more prominent diplomatic role after being largely sidelined in US President Donald Trump's effort to end the Israel-Hamas war. In Gaza City, Palestinians are grieving loved ones killed in new strikes as families ask how long they will keep being targeted and displaced. Scenes from Gaza City show families weeping over the bodies of relatives killed in the latest wave of strikes. One woman who lost 3 family members asked how long Palestinians would continue to be targeted and driven from their homes. The renewed attacks have deepened shock and exhaustion in neighborhoods already scarred by 2 years of war, with residents saying they see no sign of lasting safety despite the current truce arrangements. Meanwhile, an Israeli government spokeswoman says Israel made the decision independently to strike the Gaza Strip after one of the deadliest days since the October 10th truce and new attacks on Hezbollah in Lebanon. In a briefing, Israeli government spokeswoman Shush Bishan said Israel decided on its latest strikes in Gaza independently without specifying further, as casualty numbers rose from attacks that local officials called among the deadliest since the truce took effect on October 10th. The strikes came just hours after Israel also announced a series of attacks on Hezbollah targets in southern Lebanon, despite a nearly year-long ceasefire there. The twin escalations on both fronts are fueling concern that the fragile arrangements in Gaza and along the Lebanese border could quickly unravel. In the occupied West Bank, a months-long Israeli military operation in Tulkarem's refugee camps is still keeping thousands of residents displaced and their homes in ruins. 10 months after a major Israeli operation began in Tulkarem and surrounding northern refugee camps, large areas remain heavily damaged and many homes uninhabitable. Israeli forces say the campaign aims to dismantle armed groups, but rights organizations warn that some 32,000 Palestinians remain forcibly displaced under the ongoing Iron Wall operation. The sustained demolitions and restrictions have raised concerns about long-term displacement and the broader humanitarian impact across the camps. The Israeli army has warned residents in the Gaza envelope area that sounds of explosions will be heard in the coming hours. The army stated that the explosions heard in the area will result from operations in the southern Gaza Strip. Egypt's Foreign Minister Badr Abdulati and United Arab Emirates Foreign Minister Sheikh Abdullah bin Zayed have discussed developments in Gaza and Sudan, agreeing to step up coordination between Cairo and Abu Dhabi. In the talks, the two ministers reviewed the latest situation in the Gaza Strip and the ongoing diplomatic efforts to contain the crisis. They also discussed Sudan, including the work of the International Quartet and ways to support a ceasefire and a political path. Both sides agreed to continue close coordination and consultation between Egypt and the United Arab Emirates in the coming period to back regional security and stability. Well, for further analysis, we're joined from Cairo by international relations expert Mohammed Atamawi. Good evening to you, sir, and welcome to Qnews. And let me start by asking, are we here approaching the start of the second phase negotiations of the Gaza Agreement by any means?
Thanks to you and your dear viewers. Absolutely, I think we are approaching from a very pivotal point, but such an approachment isn't on the simple meaning and even to start an easy negotiation or even an acceptable. So the first phase is to exchange the prisoners and the truce aren't going practically be completed unless we start in a speedy manner of the second phase, as it is addressing what's going to happen the following day after the end of the war, such as the reconstructions. International and regional environment is present in open such a track as the continuation of the current situation is highly costly, including the international guarantors. Despite or having said that, there are no big hinders, and that the current approach is closing in a very complicated negotiation and not to a guaranteed solution. As you all know, the crisis was a very sensitive and delicate arrangement of the first phase of the agreement, and the readiness of the parties in addressing the details of the second phase are more complicated and more influential on the strip. As I say, regional and international powers are trying to open such a trajectory in Putin and a political track. In return, there are internal complexities that make to move on to the arrangement of a final arrangement that will face some obstacles, indications that the conflicts between the two rivals, not only between two of them on the table, but even within the Israeli cabinet.
What do you think about the Israeli violations and the continuous strikes on Gaza, and how would that obstruct the agreement and reaching the second phase of the Gaza deal?
I agree with you. Very evidently, the Israeli obstacle is not on a theoretical a possibility, but it is an apportion of instruction the Israeli making decision. The second phase is that are addressing some dossier the far right wing never wish to go through practically, including the ceasefire, even the conditions of the displaced people, the reconstructions, who is going to govern, gather politically and administratively. So, realizing the freeze of the second phase means actually to end the war completely with respect to the Israeli occupation forces, and which means in the internal political landscape, I think even the members of the cabinet might ease means of more complexity, such as the systematic installment or even elevating the ceiling of demands by creating new conditions, and it is possibly to make some operational or some military operation to pretext in freezing some negotiation. Israel is very much capable to hinder the second phase, as it represents an obstacle before the internal governance balances compared to an external development.
Mhm. Now, what do you have, or what's your comment on Netanyahu's decision to include Smotrich and Ben-Gvir in the Israeli committee responsible for the second phase negotiations of the Gaza agreement?
This decision has a very significant political approach. Netanyahu is relentlessly wishes to stay in power in order to guarantee the continuation of its coalition and also to appease its members, and joining the members of the far right wing in order to give them a sense of monitoring, also to transform the negotiation to an internal paper and to be a space of bidding or might hinder or distort the trajectory of such a decision by sending messages to the procurers by the participation of the extremist partner to indicate that the Israeli government aren't united and very much lean into a solid stance. Therefore, is minimizing more concessions. A presence of such figures within the room of making decision makes any progress of negotiation is subjected to red lines that make the second phase a subject of an internal disagreement before to have subject of a disagreement with the Palestinian side. Therefore, I can say that we are approaching of opening the second phase file, but it is accompanied of an internal political escalation by Netanyahu's step by including Ben-Gvir and Smotrich that makes it a very strong signal that make the fate of the agreement is subject to his own political interests that aren't under the security guarantees. Such a step, I think it is make the things are more difficult, and as I said, the obstacles are going to be in place, and the potential of the Israeli decision to will infringe the core of the Palestinian cause, as they do not wish to have a very independent Palestinian state.
Indeed. very complicated and remains to be seen. That was Mr. Mohammed Al-Tamawi, international relations expert from Cairo. We thank you so much for joining us here on Q News. And back to our bulletin. Israeli occupation forces have deployed across Nablus during a raid in the occupied West Bank city, with local medics accusing troops of storming shops and a mosque and assaulting residents. Armored vehicles and soldiers spread through several neighborhoods of Nablus as the Israeli army carried out a new raid in the West Bank city. A medic at the scene said troops stormed numerous shops, assaulted people, and entered a mosque, adding that commercial property had been vandalized during the operation. The raid comes amid a series of near-daily incursions across the occupied West Bank, fueling growing tension between Israeli forces and local communities. During the raid in Nablus, Israeli occupation forces fired tear gas at stone-throwing Palestinians as ambulances rushed the injured from the scene. Footage from Nablus shows Israeli army units advancing through city streets as confrontations break out, with troops firing tear gas towards groups of stone-hurling Palestinians. Thick clouds of gas filled the area while ambulances moved in to evacuate the injured. In the occupied West Bank, mourners have buried 2 Palestinian teenagers killed by Israeli forces near Ramallah during an overnight raid amid a surge in violence across the territory. Crowds in Kafr Aqab near Ramallah accompanied the funerals of 2 Palestinians aged 16 and 18 after the Palestinian Health Ministry said they were shot by Israeli forces during an overnight raid and later died of their wounds. Local media reported that troops deployed through the town streets and on rooftops before opening fire. The Israeli army referred questions to the border police, which has yet to comment, while the October 10th ceasefire has largely halted fighting in Gaza. The West Bank has seen rising tensions, tighter military restrictions on Palestinian movement, and an escalation in settlers' attacks. And moving on, voting for Egyptians abroad in the second phase of the 2025 House of Representatives elections has begun, with polling taking place over 2 days in 117 countries. The second phase of the 2025 parliamentary elections covers the governorates of Cairo, قليوبية, دقهلية, منوفية, غربية, كفر الشيخ, شرقية, دمياط, Port Said, Ismailia, Suez, North Sinai and South Sinai. Egyptians residing abroad whose home governorates fall within this phase are eligible to cast their ballots at embassies and consulates around the world as part of their constitutional right to take part in choosing the new House of Representatives. The director of the executive body of the Egyptian National Election Authority, Councillor Ahmed Bendari, confirmed that the voting process is running smoothly in all polling stations that opened abroad without any complaints or remarks. Councillor Bendari stated that the authority received confirmation that work had begun in 105 overseas polling stations out of a total of 139 distributed across 117 countries worldwide. He called on Egyptians abroad whose electoral domicile falls within the governorates of the second phase of the House of Representatives elections to participate during the 2-day voting, urging them to head to the designated polling stations and cast their votes for the candidates they deem suitable. The Sudan Doctors Network reported the death of 23 children from severe malnutrition over the past months in the cities of Diling and Kirguli in South Kordofan. The network stated that the blockade imposed on Diling and Kadguli puts the lives of thousands of civilians at risk. And to Syria, where media reports say Israeli forces have advanced into a village in southern Qnews as Syrian army sends reinforcements in the Raqqa countryside after Israeli operations inside Syria. According to Syrian reports, Israeli forces pushed into the village of Sayyida al-Hanout in the southern country yard of Qnews. The same outlets say the Syrian army has deployed reinforcements to the Raqqa countryside in northern Syria following an announcement by the Israeli army that it carried out operations on Syrian territory to locate and destroy weapons. The reported moves come amid continued tensions along Syria's fronts, with Israel and ongoing strikes on targets linked to armed groups. Lebanon's army commander Rodolphe Heikel says the plan to extend state authority across all Lebanese territory is moving ahead on schedule and requires the highest levels of wisdom and deliberation. Army Commander Rodolphe Heikel affirmed that implementing the army's plan to assert state authority over all Lebanese territory demands careful, measured steps and is progressing according to its set timetable. He stressed that the Lebanese army continues to combat terrorism, pursue those who undermine security, fight drug trafficking across different regions, secure and protect Lebanese northern and eastern borders and territorial waters, and work to prevent smuggling as part of its wider role in safeguarding stability. Lebanese President Joseph Aoun has met commanders of the army's South Litani sector in Tyr as Lebanon reinforces its presence near the Israeli border under a U.S.-brokered ceasefire. During a visit to the South Litani sector command in the southern city of Tyr, President Joseph Aoun was briefed on the army's deployments and security measures along the border with Israel. Lebanon's armed forces have been stepping up their presence in the south since the U.S.-brokered ceasefire took effect, while facing heavy American pressure to accelerate efforts to disarm Hezbollah. The meeting underscored the army's central role in maintaining calm in the area and asserting state authority across the southern frontier. Russian President Vladimir Putin announced that he has received the American plan regarding Ukraine, noting that he believes it could serve as a basis for a final resolution. Putin said that Russia reviewed Trump's plan prior to the Alaska summit, during which the U.S. side asked Russia for additional concessions and greater flexibility. He expressed his readiness to examine and discuss the U.S. plan on the Ukrainian crisis in detail, emphasizing that the United States had not previously discussed this plan with Russia. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky stated that Kiev is facing one of the toughest moments in its history, either accepting 28 difficult points of a plan or enduring an extremely harsh winter. Zelensky added that he will work calmly with the United States and all partners, emphasizing that constructive solutions will be sought, while noting that he is under intense pressure to make a very difficult decision. EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says the bloc will keep backing Ukraine against Russian aggression, telling the G20 summit in South Africa that Kiev can count on us. Speaking on the sidelines of the G20, Ursula von der Leyen said the EU's support for Ukraine is a defense of the UN Charter itself, not just one country. She noted that the bloc has imposed 19 sanctions packages on Moscow, which she said are fueling high inflation, rising interest rates, and an overheated war economy in Russia. She added that talks with EU and G20 leaders will focus on global security and economic stability, while European Council President Antonio Costa declined to comment on a 28-point peace plan put forward by the Trump administration ahead of the summit. The Kremlin says it has not yet received an official 28-point US peace plan for Ukraine, but insists Russia remains open to talks as its forces push forward on the battlefield. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said Moscow and Washington are not yet discussing the US proposals in detail, but confirmed that contacts are underway and that Russia is completely open to peace negotiations. He argued that recent Russian advances are narrowing President Vladimir Zelensky's options, calling it better to negotiate now rather than later, and describing continuation of the war as pointless and dangerous for Ukraine. Kiev says it has received the US plan and is studying it, with Zelensky writing that Ukraine is ready for constructive, honest and prompt work without commenting on the contents. German Foreign Minister Johann Wadephul says the US-backed proposal to end the war in Ukraine is a list of issues that must be urgently discussed, not a final peace plan. Speaking in Brussels, where he is attending an Indo-Pacific ministerial meeting, Johann Wadephul said Berlin views the US-supported plan as a framework of points that Ukraine and Russia need to address at the negotiating table rather than a finished agreement. He stressed that Germany's stance reflects the wider European position of backing Ukraine, adding that Berlin wants Kiev to enter any talks from a position of strength. A Russian attack on the southeastern Ukrainian city of Zaporizhzhia has killed 5 people and injured 3 as Moscow's forces keep advancing and President Vladimir Putin reiterates his conditions to end the war. Regional Governor Ivan Vedrov said Russian-guided munitions hit Zaporizhzhia late on Thursday, killing 5 civilians and injuring 3 after authorities warned residents of an impending strike. Emergency services battled fire and evacuated the wounded nearly 4 years into the invasion. Russian troops now control about 19% of Ukrainian territory, and Moscow claims 4 regions as part of Russia. Putin has set out core demands for any settlement, including the Kiev-abandoned plans to join NATO and withdraw its forces from Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson and Zaporizhzhia, conditions Ukraine and its Western partners reject. At least 15 people have been killed and 7 injured in a factory explosion in Pakistan's Faisalabad after a blast brought down the building and damaged nearby homes. Local emergency services say the explosion ripped through the factory on Friday, collapsing the structure and destroying several surrounding houses, with residents and workers trapped under the debris. Punjab rescue officials believe a gas leak inside the facility allowed fumes to build up before they were likely ignited by a spark or heat source, triggering a powerful blast and structural collapse. Search and rescue teams are combing the rubble for survivors as authorities open an investigation into safety conditions at the site. That brings us to the end of our news bulletin, but before we wrap up, here is a recap of the top stories making headlines for this hour. The European Union pledged over 88 million euros this year to support the Palestinian Authority. Israel says it acted independently in striking Gaza. And Egypt's foreign minister and his United Arab Emirates counterpart discussed Gaza and Sudan and agreed to boost coordination. For more stories and live updates, follow Qnews on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at Qnews CGY. From all of us here, many thanks for watching and good night.